ASML is caught right in the crossfire of global geopolitics. China has been one of its biggest customers, but export bans are straining that relationship and fueling the risk of a homegrown rival. And with Taiwan being home to ASML's most important clients, the company's growth is inseparable from one of the world's riskiest flashpoints. Well, to discuss Taiwan's role in ASML's growth and what could possibly challenge its monopoly, we are joined in our studio by Marc Hijink, a Dutch journalist and author of Focus, the ASML Way, Inside the Power Struggle Over the Most Complex Machine on Earth. Marc, thanks for staying with us. I will start by asking you, why each of ASML's EUV lithography systems can come up to double the cost of a US F-35 fighter jet. Given that, with that massive price tag, how has this company and their product remained unchallenged?
Well, first of all, it's a very complex machine to replicate, and I think it's also very hard to copy the way ASML works. So I was talking about the ecosystem, and also the way of thinking in Europe. So Europe has a tradition of tool making, industrializing, and you see the same common long-term vision in a couple of countries. For example, Austria, Switzerland, Germany, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. I call this in my book the Rhinish way of thinking, because they are all connected by the river Rhine, which is based about this long-term vision that, well, this really complex lithography machine, you could compare to building a cathedral. It takes years and dedication, and it takes trust. And this bond of trust is built in Europe. It takes a lot of effort, because cultures in Europe also differ, as I described. The Germans and the Dutch also fight, but it's very, they're still focused on this long-term goal. If you compare that to the Anglo-Saxon way of doing business, a lot of companies are making judgments and decisions and building strategic on shareholder value. So it's about optimizing profits. And you could consider ASML and its supply chain as that it takes profit as an effect, but not as a goal. And the end result, of course, is building a profitable industry, but in the end, it's a neutral player trying to get the entire ecosystem of the semiconductor industry to such a level that it keeps on innovating and improving society. That's where the money is, and that's where our lives improve. But to replicate that Rhinish sense of doing business in another country, for example in China, which is also trying to build its own domestic tools, amongst others the lithography tool, it's very hard. So you can do research in a lab. That's, of course, quite easy, because EUV research has been around the globe for over, I think, 3 decades. But to get it working in such a way that you can make money with it, it takes a bond of trust, and also the experience, the learning cycles. So that's kind of ASML's moat.
I do want to talk a little bit more about this very, very intricate supply chain and China. But before we do that, we have an interesting question for you sent by one of our regular viewers from France. Gilemon X left this comment under one of our videos on lithography on YouTube. ASML is almost invisible to the general public, despite being one of the most important companies in the world. And he says, I wonder whether they see this invisibility as more of a strength or a burden.
Oh, excellent question, because that's one of the reasons I actually wrote the book, because I wanted to make this invisible world visible for the outside world. I wanted people to understand, even though they're not an engineer or not working in the semiconductor industry, what the importance and the crucial elements are that ASML provides for the rest of the world. And looking back, ASML loved being obscure, because nobody was nagging them, and they didn't care about politics, let alone geopolitics. So they could focus their attention on the real problems, which is building this complex machine. And they had to learn and to adapt, because around 2017 and 2018, it became clear that the world was changing and globalization was like stalling, because China was developing too rapidly, and ASML being the provider of this crucial tool, was kind of limited in exporting the most advanced tool, the EUV machine, to China. Actually, the ban for China was issued in 2019-20 about that time, but the first cracks in the globalization trend were already seen in the semiconductor industry in 2017. That's when ASML noticed when, well, for example, the US were adding export controls to certain fabs in China. So things started to change. What was a surprise is that the Dutch government didn't realize how important this very invisible company was in their own backyard. So on the contrary, what you see here in Taiwan is everybody's realizing how important semiconductor industry is, but we don't have any fabs in the Netherlands. The only fabs we have are very old Philips fabs, and they're bound to disappear anyway. So we do have ASML, but, well, it's very complex. So the politicians in The Hague, where our government resides, they never were very much interested in what was happening in the south of the Netherlands, something with computers or chips, complicated.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, until the US tapped them on the shoulders. Hey, do you know what company you have in your backyard and what they provide to the rest of the world? And so also the Dutch politicians had to learn the value of ASML and that there was a need to protect that value for national security reasons, but also for economical reasons, because if you would limit ASML completely out of an important market like China, it will hurt their possibilities to innovate, because you get less revenue, less capital to spend on the newer generations and doing research. So that's a balance the Dutch government is trying to find out. And ASML doesn't like surprises. Like any company, it wants to have certainty, because that's the fundamentals of doing these long-term investments. And it took a while for the Dutch government and ASML to align their efforts to make sure that the balance is right. And I describe this in my book. And the funny thing is, you know, I'm just a Dutch reporter from NRC. So in Washington, nobody knew me, but everybody knew ASML. They called it that company. Like because they also thought it was quite mysterious and obscure. So for me, it was a surprise to notice that I even got access to the White House and the National Security Council, because they were willing to explain their point of view. Okay, why are we limiting ASML? So for me, it was a great opportunity to also look behind these walls and to paint a complete and holistic picture of what's happening in the industry. They used to like this obscurity, but they do realize that they can't keep out of the picture anymore, because the focus of the world is on ASML. It's on in every headline, on every front page, whenever anything happens to the semiconductor industry. So if you're forced to being visible, you want to do your own framing, I guess. And I think my book is a lucky timing, so to speak, because it's an objective view on a company trying to switch from being obscure to be more open and transparent. So ASML was always pretty open when it comes to engineering, because it had to do a lot of research together with their supply chain, with their customers, with the research centers they cooperated with. But the industry itself is complicated, so they also want other people who make decisions, for example, set the rules, like politicians, to understand what the company is about. And I think what I offer, what Focus the ASML Way offers, is like an easy glimpse into that industry. So it's kind of an instrumental book as well for politicians, I hope.
Okay, speaking of politicians, now that they're getting more involved, companies like ASML and TSMC were built on technical genius. Can technical genius thrive when politics comes into play?
I don't think they totally, they're an easy mix, but you have to hold in account that I have a different theory. Let me explain it to you. So we had this era of globalization, and the semiconductor industry thrived on that. That's the reason why you have so much innovation, to concentrate, to make it more efficient. But the pandemic has taught us how crucial chips are for everybody on the planet. So it doesn't make sense to rely completely on one corner of the earth that supplies for the rest of the world, because it's just too, well, vulnerable. The pandemic has taught us that. And it's easy to stay in this usual framing of national security and military, which is all true. But if you zoom out, then for the entire society, it makes sense to replicate some elements of the semiconductor industry in every region. So if another pandemic might happen, we keep things running. And so during the last pandemic, it was about car industry and PlayStation 5. But in the next pandemic, it might be about AI running our lives, our self-driving cars, the humanoids that might take care of you when you get old. So there's a responsibility, I think, in the industry to deglobalize and de-risk. So you see that happening in TSMC's footprint. So majority is still in Taiwan. The R&D is still in Taiwan, but they start replicating in Japan. Recently visited their their buildings in Singapore, where they're doing this joint venture together with a Dutch company called NXP, former Philips. They're expanding in Dresden in Germany, and of course they're expanding in the US, in Arizona, which I also visited. And ASML has to follow that accordingly, because like its peers, ASML has to be close to its customers, because every fab is a supply chain hub. It's chemicals, it's tools, it's spare parts, it's people servicing the machines. The people at ASML consider their machines, they call them babies. And they call themselves nurses, because these babies take constant care, 24/7. Because every time there's a tool down in the chip fab, it costs money, lots of money. And so there's a need for the customer service of ASML to keep these machines running. So actually they're paid by ASML, but often they feel their responsibility is with the customers. And that's something, that mindset is something that Martin van den Brink used to hammer on. Okay, take care of the customer, because without our customers, we're nothing. But I was talking about replication of that system. It takes talent to run chip fabs. It takes discipline. And as we see, it's very hard to replicate that in every area of the globe, because cultures are different, our mindset is different, worker ethos is different. And you see that happening in TSMC fabs in Arizona that are being occupied by, I think half of them is Taiwanese people, because it's very hard to find talent in other parts of the world. So deglobalization makes sense, just for our security and to keep our society running. But I think it's limited by the amount of human talent that we have on the planet.
Right. And unfortunately, with deglobalization also comes certain issues. You know, you look at these export controls placed on China. ASML's CEO has recently acknowledged that due to these restrictions to EUVs to China, China will find it difficult to get past the 5 to 3 nanometer nodes.
I think it's even worse. It's 7 to 5 nanometers.
5, maybe. So China, meanwhile, is building its own lithography machines to eventually service its own needs. Yeah. How concerned is ASML about that? And do they currently see China as competition, perhaps in the near future?
Well, if you look at the ambition of China is to build a domestic technology stack. So it's not only the semiconductor equipment, but also the chips themselves, the AI models, and of course, it takes a lot of engineering to get these machines running. Well, they have succeeded in building alternatives for ASML peers, like KLA and Applied, other machines you use, other tools you use in a chip fab. So there are Chinese alternatives for that. The lithography machine is kind of hard to replicate. They try to re-engineer it or to copy it. There's a lot of knowledge there, but because the ASML built this machine using shared knowledge throughout an entire ecosystem. You can see it as a huge jigsaw puzzle, and there are just a couple of pieces of the puzzle, but it's not enough to create a commercially viable lithography machine. Of course, when it comes to older technology, there is already competition. So back in 2000, I think there was a company called SMEE that was already building lithography tools. And they actually bought an ASML tool to try to re-engineer it, but they had a hard time because it's complex material. And until this day, I think SMEE is capable of doing 28 nanometers. And there's another competitor, Cycaria, I think the latest story is that they have 65 nanometer. They might improve as well. But don't pay too much attention on nanometers only, because for chip manufacturers it's very important to also have error-free chips. Otherwise it becomes way too expensive, and to have a high throughput. So these are the other parameters. I call it the holy trinity that are important for a fab. So only the accuracy or the density doesn't say too much. Now, what's happening if ASML is being banned from China? This will stimulate China to find alternatives. So of course they're trying to build their own EUV machine, and it might happen in the end. As the people at ASML say, the forces of nature are the same in Beijing as they are in Brabant. That's the province where ASML is founded. And it's easier if somebody else has already proven it can be done. It's like when you drive in your car at night and you see headlights or taillights in front of you. It's easier to follow that car. So there's going to be an attempt to replicate EUV. So ASML is very much focused of out-innovating, building better tools with higher throughput and better yield to make it more attractive. It might take a decade or even longer, but they might get there. I'm not sure. I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm very sure that there are attempts. Yeah.
We're just about running out of time, and so many more questions. Some of them would be answered in your book.
I can hope.
But before we go, final question on Taiwan. Given that we see, as we go into an AI-driven tech future, does ASML see Taiwan as continuing to be one of its biggest clients and perhaps its biggest partnerships in, and I know you said you don't have a crystal ball, but what is their view when it comes to strategy with Taiwan in the future? Are they still seeing Taiwan as one of their key partners?
Well, let's make a difference between the country and the industry. So TSMC is one of the biggest and most important customers for ASML, and TSMC is expanding, so its market share is also actually expanding. I think it does about 70% of all the chips and 90% of the highly advanced chips. So the importance of TSMC is huge, and ASML has to grow accordingly. That's why they're preparing for this huge leap of growth. Once there's less uncertainty in the market due to tariffs and trade talks and you name it, and everything is on the table. Investment plans, export restrictions. And the Chinese now also know how to play this game. They have export restrictions as well. So it's very uncertain. But once things cool down, the industry is going to expect a huge leap of growth. And both TSMC and ASML and every other customer of ASML is preparing for that. When it comes to Taiwan, it's very, just look back 6 decades. Philips, the mother company of ASML, started 58 years ago here in Taiwan. So there are a lot of connections between the Dutch and the Taiwanese. And I was telling you that I feel at home here. So, and I'm sure that people at ASML working here in the fabs here or in Lingkao or in the new offices they're building in north of Taipei are going to feel here at home too.
And very, very quickly, sorry, my producer's telling me we're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, what would you say is your biggest takeaway that you're applying to yourself from doing this research at ASML, or spending so much time with ASML employees or in their offices or within their operations?
Wow. Well, I think I learned a lot. I was very happy with the title because, well, it explains what ASML is about, focus, but it also applied to me personally because this is my first book, and I learned that you can dive into things more deeply if you spend enough time, if you don't get distracted from the mundane stuff, if you don't do social media. Saves you a lot of time. So if you stay focused on one
good
topic...
thing to say in our industry.
So if you add focus to your work, you get so much better result, and you add value. And that's one lesson, well, I cherish.